did that really well.
Thank you.
Good start.
Well, good evening. Welcome to the Denver Post Debates. My name is Chuck Plunkett. I'm the politics editor here.
And I'm Molly Hughes. I am the director of Denver Post TV. We want to also welcome our viewers online who are watching our live stream at denverpost.com and DPTV.
Before we begin, Molly and I would like to explain the format that we've put together. We'll have a 90-minute debate. The candidates have agreed to our format. We've asked them to work without prepared notes. We've provided them notepads and pens if they want to take notes during the debate.
And by the way, we should probably let them know that if you click the pen a certain way, it lights up.
We like that. That's
so don't be alarmed.
Okay.
All right, so here's what we're asking of you, our live audience, all right? We ask that you have no campaign signs. I don't see any now, but we have seen them appear afterwards, after we get started. So no campaign signs, no heckling, no overt reactions, campaigning, or loud noises. We, in fact, would like you to remain quiet until the end of the 90-minute debate. Anyone who is caught violating these rules will be asked to leave, and we also ask that you refrain from applauding. Got it? We all good with that? All right.
As moderators and journalists, we've put together a list of questions. We've also solicited questions from people like you, our readers and viewers. We will have 4 different categories of questions. We'll have a round of questions for everyone. We will have questions that are rapid fire or yes or no questions that we believe should be answerable in a yes or no. We have candidate-specific questions, or questions that we've come up for each of the candidates. And then we have a round where the candidates are allowed to ask each other a question.
And then one housekeeping note, we've had a few people ask about Wi-Fi. We do have free Wi-Fi. There is no password. It would be, the one to log into is DP01, for those of you who are still curious about that. All right, so we will describe how each segment will work of the 4 categories Chuck just described as we go along. We'll kind of lay out the ground rules at the beginning of each section. We do reserve the right to eliminate questions and kind of restructure, or I should say adjust the format on the fly, and that would only be to accommodate our timeline and get you all out of here at our 7:30 timeline is what we're committed to. How's that sound? All right. Ready to start?
Let's do it.
You guys ready?
Ready. We're ready.
All right. There is a clock here, which I'm sure you can see. Time. All right.
Will that be you or a buzzer?
There we go. All right. So first of all, we're going to start with the questions that will be directed to each of you. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond. If a candidate is called out or attacked in that 60-second response, then that person will have 30 seconds to respond. From there, it will be up to us as moderators to decide how far the back and forth continues. And then we will rotate in order. We're going to start with Mr. Blaha, work our way down the line, and we will rotate so that you each take turns going first. Sound good?
Perfect.
All right, here we go. First question, gentlemen. You are here because you wish to defeat Colorado's senior senator, Democrat Michael Bennet. Are there any votes that Mr. Bennet has cast that you agree with? Mr. Blaha.
I would say very few that I would support. You know, if you look at his voting record, it's really been one where he's about 90 to 100% voted with the left. He's consistently supported the Obama agenda over and over again. I think most notable, though, in the things that he's done that are actually most objectionable is his position with Iran. That's actually what brought me into this race. You know, I was enjoying kind of being at home with my family, and I said in September of 2015 that if he supports the Iranian position and our probably worst ever negotiated deal from a foreign policy standpoint, that I would get in the race. He did. I get in the race. There's a litany of different things he's not supported that we need, including not, and most notably, probably Obamacare. 60 votes. He was the 60th vote. So he's a guy that just is way left, way too extreme for Colorado.
Okay, Mr. Frazier, are there any votes Mr. Bennett has cast that you agree with?
Well, Chuck, you know, when you have a senator like Michael Bennett who votes with President Obama's agenda 98% of the time, I'm sure maybe there's 2% of the time we could agree. But the reality is that Senator Michael Bennett has proven time and again that he just does not represent Colorado values. We cannot trust Michael Bennett to represent Colorado. He voted, and what is one of the important swing votes in the Senate, to put forth Obamacare. And we all know the impact that's having on tens of thousands of Coloradans today whose premiums continue to skyrocket. And quite frankly, we see exchanges and co-ops closing. And the reality is that Obamacare is not working for Coloradans. It's not working for America. And Senator Bennett was responsible for helping usher that through without one Republican vote for it. So I ask you, can he find a vote where he would actually support Republicans for a change? The answer seems like no to me.
All right, Mr. Glenn. Are there any votes Mr. Bennett has cast that you agree with?
I think it would be hard-pressed to find that. You know, the one thing I want to make sure people understand is I've been out talking to people in Colorado, and there's three words: I get it. There's a lot of frustration that's out there. We start talking about why we are having this movement with Make America Great. Mr. Bennett has done everything he can to basically suppress Coloradans, whether it's the defense of this country, whether it's voting to make sure that we're energy independent, or just basic fiscal responsibility. These are three fundamental areas where he has failed Colorado. This is the reason why I'm going to be your next United States Senator. So when you're going back, looking at his background and his experience, Mr. Bennett, he's failed us. We need a change, and I'm going to be that change.
Mr. Graham, are there any votes Mr. Bennett has cast that you agree with?
You know, I wouldn't characterize it as a vote as much as his willingness to extend himself as in opposition of Amendment 69, which we all know is going to be on the ballot in November, and that's the single-payer healthcare system that's being proposed. And the fact that Michael Bennett, as well as Governor Hickenlooper, have come out in opposition of Amendment 69, from my perspective, I appreciate that very much, because I have actually personally lived in a single-payer universal healthcare system, had those experiences. I know what rationed healthcare looks like. Having said all of that, I also know that back in 2010, when Senator Bennett was running for office, he came out with what was called the public option for healthcare, which was absolutely moving us in the direction of a single-payer universal healthcare system. I appreciate his opposition to Amendment 69, and at the same time, I'm very concerned, particularly as we move towards the risk that Hillary Clinton could become the next president in the White House, which I certainly hope it does not occur, that our risk that we could have a single-payer system in this country is very great. And I don't trust Michael Bennett's votes in that regard.
Mr. Keyser, how about you? Are there any votes Mr. Bennett has cast that you agree with?
Well, as we do know, Michael Bennett has voted with the president 98% of the time, so maybe in that 2%, there's something in there to work with. But I wanted to take a second and clear the air also for an issue that's been lingering out there, the signature issue, and I want to address it head on. You know, the signature issue that we've been dealing with is something that I didn't come out with and speak about right away, because I think leaders have to have the courage and the integrity and the discipline to make sure that they have all the information that they can gather before they come out and talk about an honest answer. And here's the truth. My campaign hired a company. That company hired another company. And that company hired a subcontracted employee that wound up, it looks like, circumventing the law. And that's wrong. Now, the Denver Post, I think, has done a good job at covering this story for what it is. But frankly, there's a lot of media outlets in this state that have really done a lot of the heavy lifting and carried the water for the liberals on this to disguise Michael Bennett's record and get us talking about anything that doesn't involve Michael Bennett. I think what you're going to see from these men up here tonight is men that are going to stand up and talk about the issues that we are concerned about as Republicans, because that is what Colorado deserves, and that's what Republicans deserve.
I appreciate you hitting that question right on. There's been news in that today, and indeed we had a question or two related to that. I'll just go ahead and jump ahead real quick. I guess the metaphor we've been kind of thinking about is if you're, or the way we've been thinking about it is if you're the big boss of a campaign and your job is to petition your way onto the ballot instead of go the convention route, what responsibility do you feel that you bear for these irregularities and these problems that we've been discovering?
Well, I think that, like we've been talking about for weeks, we have been dealing with stories here in the media, all of us have, about spilled ink, about the delegate process, the petition process, signatures, and all of this thing. For weeks and weeks, we've been having this going on. And, I think there's a big problem here in the media because there's a double standard that exists. Frankly, I don't know of anybody jumping out of the bushes to ask Michael Bennett questions about his vote on Iran or his support of closing Guantanamo Bay and importing the world's most dangerous terrorists to the United States and probably right here to Colorado. How about his support of Obamacare and the fact that it's failed? Just this week, in fact, if you need a specific case, on the Western Slope, Michael Bennett went to the Grand Junction and he said this. He said, I know that Obamacare has been devastating for Coloradans, but I don't have the answers.
We were talking about the forged signatures and the irregularities. We learned today that even a dead person appeared in the signatures that were turned in. You've seen the blogs that have been popping around, the radio program that you were on weeks ago where you talked about double checking and triple checking the signatures. So the question is, how much personal responsibility do you bear for making sure all those are right, even if you have a contractor and subcontractor basis? Did you sit down? Did you say, look, I want to make sure those things are pristine. I'm going the ballot measure, the petition measure. I'm not facing a convention.
Yeah, as I've already said, Chuck, I think it's important that we look at the specific scenario here and what happened. And again, as I mentioned, in February, my campaign, just like everyone who went through the petition process, campaign came to me and said, we need to have somebody that can help us navigate this very complicated process that we have here in Colorado. And frankly, I think it's the most complicated process that we have probably in the country in order to get onto the ballot in the first place. So my campaign, again, we hired a company. That company hired another company that hired an employee, that vetted that employee, that trained that employee, that apparently did a background check on that employee, and that employee apparently broke the law. And that's a very serious thing. And I understand that. As I've already mentioned, it's very serious. But we have got to make sure that we're talking about the issues that Republicans care about. They didn't come here tonight
Okay,
to
so
listen
let's
to us
do
talk
that.
about signatures. They came to hear about our ideas.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the next question. Gentlemen, are there any votes Cory Gardner has cast that you disagreed with? And we'll start this one with Mr. Frazier.
Cory Gardner, I think, is an excellent senator, and if I'm the next United States Senator from Colorado, I look forward to an opportunity to work with Cory. The one vote that I think is worthy of further review, that if I were in the United States Senate, I'm not sure I could have bought off on completely, was the most recent budget. I believe that there were a lot of fiscal, quite frankly, spending that we need to control. Our debt and deficit situation is out of control. I think what you're seeing across Colorado from Republicans, independents, and even Democrats is an understanding that we cannot continue to spend more money than we actually have and have to borrow those resources. And this is one of the reasons I support a balanced budget amendment that would require our United States government to actually balance its budget and live within its means. When I represented the city of Aurora, we balance our budget each and every year, $750 million. And as much as I'd like to tell you it was because it was the right thing to do, it was because we had to. And I think that same requirement is needed for our federal government.
Mr. Glenn, are there any votes Cory Gardner has cast that you disagreed with?
I would agree. I am concerned with that last budget vote. I can tell you, as I spent the last 13 years as an elected official dealing with budgets. And when you're out talking with people, they're frustrated about fiscal responsibility, the fact that we're over $20 trillion in debt. Basic families understand what budgeting is. You cannot spend more money than you have bringing in. And you cannot vote on a budget that's basically so complicated that you have to vote on it just to be able to get things passed. I think it's wrong. I think we need to stand up, ask for more transparency. We cannot continue to spend our way out of this problem. Revenue is not an issue. We need to start cutting taxes. We need to make sure that we're more fiscally responsible. And as Coloradans, especially as elected officials, we live here under Tabor. We understand what it's like to have fiscal responsibility. We need to have that in Washington, and I'm going to bring that to Washington.
Mr. Graham, are there any votes Cory Gardner has cast that you disagreed with?
You know, I think the world of Senator Gardner, and I think he's representing the people of the state of Colorado effectively and the people of the United States as well. Not a specific vote, but as much as his position on whether or not we should hold hearings with the replacement of Justice Scalia. I have a phenomenal amount of respect for Justice Scalia. I do believe we need someone to replace him who has the same kind of constitutional conservative values as he did. President Obama had an obligation to put forward a nominee, and he did with Merrick Garland, and the Senate has refused to even hold hearings. And I disagree with that decision, and Cory Gardner has stood alongside that decision. I do disagree with it for a couple of reasons. First, I think the questions that will be asked will be very revealing to Americans, that we all get to understand what the important questions are. And equally important, I think we're presenting ourselves as the oppositionists, as the people that just don't get along, won't do the things that are collaborative and cooperative. And I don't find that constructive. I think the Republican Party needs to present itself as the party that does cooperate and collaborate. We are in control of the Senate. And if he doesn't meet our standards, we are in a position that we can vote him down. I would have much preferred that we took that path instead.
Mr. Keyser, how about you? Are there any votes Cory Gardner has cast that you disagree with?
Well, I like and respect Senator Gardner a great deal, and I also have a little bit of a problem with Washington just generally and how we do our budgeting process in Washington, D.C. You know, I think as Coloradans, we understand that this is a false notion that we've been presented with, that we have to have these thousands and thousands of page-long bills that get dropped off on a member's desk on the night before they have to vote. And then the leadership goes to those members and they say, hey, you know, you have to vote for this bill, which is going to fund the entire government. And you have to vote for it because if you don't, then they're going to say in November that you voted not to support our troops or that you voted not to pay our troops. That's wrong. What common sense would just tell us is that we have 12 departments in the federal government. I think that we need departmental budgeting so we can go through each individual budget line by line, and only then will we be able to finally get control of the spending problem that we have in Washington, D.C. Spending is our problem right now, and Michael Bennet has been terrible on our national debt and on spending. Just in his time in the Senate alone, our national debt has nearly doubled.
So time before we go back to Bennett. Mr. Blaha.
Let me
Mr. Blaha.
guess.
Yeah.
Are there any bills that I would?
Yes, sir,
support?
please. Please indulge us.
I'm going to take a little different approach in answering this question, and here's why. The issue is not whether we like Cory or not. I think everybody up here would agree that Cory's a good guy. The issue is this. We should have never been in that situation. We should have never been in the situation where we were voting on a bill that we knew for at least 8 or 9 months, within 3 or 4 days, when that bill was going to take place. So if we would have been aggressive and we would have put a communication plan together and pointed out the pork, folks, the amount of pork that was in that bill is shameful. It's absolutely shameful, but we didn't. What we did is we let time pass. We let time pass, and at the last minute, Republican leadership stood up, flapped their hands, talked about what a horrible bill it was, and guess what happened? It got passed. Had we put a really thoughtful communication plan together with the American people and showed them how devastating this would be to our kids and our grandkids, it would have never happened. So that is the issue. We need a different approach, we need a different technique, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
All right, our next segment. This question, gentlemen, is on the question of abortion. Do you support overturning Roe v. Wade? And if so, what exceptions, if any, would you support? Mr. Glenn.
You know, abortion is a very personal decision. I am an unapologetic pro-life American. I don't agree with the decision of Roe v. Wade. I understand when you start talking about those circumstances that women find themselves in. That's a difficult thing. I'm a parent. I've got 2 daughters. And I can tell you, I'm going to treat them with love and respect and dignity if they end up in a situation like that. I'm going to pray for them. I want to make sure that they have to make an informed decision. But it's a personal decision that they have to make. But when it comes to taxpayer funding of that decision, I cannot support that.
Mr. Graham, do you support overturning Roe v. Wade? And if so, what exemptions, if any, would you allow?
You know, the sanctity of life is incredibly important, near and dear to my heart. It's how I've lived my life. It's how I've raised my family. At the same time, I do think America is the place of individual liberties, individual freedoms. It's the place where we get to choose to live our lives as we see fit, and that our view is that the government should be involved as minimally as possible in our lives. And so I do support a woman's right to choose. I would not support the idea of overturning Roe v. Wade. And with that said, there are limitations and practical common sense limitations associated with that right and that responsibility. There should be no late-term abortions or partial birth abortions. There should be no public funding, government funding of abortions or abortion consulting as well. And if in fact Planned Parenthood decides to go forward and continue that activity, they should be defunded.
Mr. Keyser, how about you? Do you support overturning Roe v. Wade? And if so, what exceptions would you support?
Well, of course, the answer to the question is not simply a vote to support overturning Roe v. Wade, but truly what is at stake in this election is the balance of the United States Senate, and our constitutional rights hang in the balance with the recent passing of Justice Scalia. So the next Senate very well may be voting on up to 3 Supreme Court justices. And I have one criteria for evaluating each of those Supreme Court justices, and that's just this, that they, in the same vein as Justice Scalia, look at the law, they evaluate the law through the lens of the Constitution, and that they abide by the written word of the Constitution, because it means what it says. So I'm pro-life. I've always believed in protecting life. We have to do that. I'll do that when I'm in the United States Senate. I'm pro-life, and I do believe that there are 3 exceptions: rape, incest, and the life of the mother.
Mr. Blaha, how about you?
I'm a pro-life candidate myself, as many of the people are up here. But I think it's important to point out that really Roe v. Wade is and should have been a 10th Amendment issue. You know, it's another good example where the federal government has bypassed the Constitution and made decisions for all of us when it should have been left to a state level. So my preference would have been to see it sent back, remanded, sent back to the state, and allow the states individually to decide what individual states' right. I'm a very strong supporter of individual rights for states. 10th Amendment is something that I think has absolutely been overtrodden and overrun by our federal government, and I think it's something we need to get back to. So I'm a pro-life candidate, no funding from the federal government, but the important thing here, I think, is we need to get back to the place where the states have rights. The states are listened to, as opposed to this huge bureaucracy of the federal government.
Mr. Frazier, where do you stand on this? Do you support overturning Roe v. Wade? And if so, what exceptions, if any, would you support?
I'm pro-life. I've always believed in the sanctity of life. As United States Senator, I don't get to vote on Roe v. Wade. But here's what I do get to vote on. I get to vote on those measures that decide whether we fund or allow funding to go towards abortions. I do not believe that federal tax dollars should pay for abortions. Those issues are very controversial in our country, and I believe because of that, we need to ensure that federal dollars, federal taxpayer dollars, are not going towards it. I also get to vote on our next Supreme Court justice, assuming that decision is still there if I'm elected in November. And the reality is, I believe we have to ensure that the next Supreme Court justice is someone who has a proven track record of upholding our Constitution and interpreting the rule of law as it was intended. That's someone that I want to see on the Supreme Court, someone who will ensure that we preserve the integrity of what the courts are supposed to do.
Gentlemen, gender identity and sexual orientation have sprung into the spotlight. For years, Congress has introduced but not passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would expand rights for the LGBTQ community. Congressman Mike Coffman co-sponsored such a bill in the past. If it were to be introduced again, would you support it, and why or why not? And we start this one with Mr. Graham.
You know, I think the most relevant question that's come up in that context has been the recent decision coming out of the White House related to transgender identities and how bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms are going to be managed. And I have to tell you, from my perspective, I have been almost horrified by the actions taken by the White House and their decision to step forward and tell every school district in America exactly how they should manage those issues. The fact of the matter is that the people in the school districts, the parents in the school districts, are the ones who are in a position that they can make those decisions for our children and for our school districts. That's where that belongs. And in fact, in the state of Colorado, well ahead of President Obama, who I'm not sure if he thinks he's the president anymore, or the czar, or the king, or the emperor, given the overreach that's taken place. But we've already tackled that issue in the state of Colorado in many school districts, and we've done so successfully.
Mr. Keyser, where do you stand? If the Non-Discrimination Act were to be introduced again, would you support it? If so, why or why not?
Well, in Colorado, as was earlier mentioned, we already have that sort of law on the books. So I think it's important that we really have to focus right now. And the number one job of the federal government is national security. We have got to ensure that we are focused on national security and defense. Now, there's a bunch of other issues that we can talk about, and those are important too. But we have to get back to doing the number one job, and we have to do that very well. And of course, these are lessons that I've learned when I've served on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. I know what it takes to keep this country safe. I know what it takes to keep this country secure and prosperous. That's where we have to have our focus. So that's an important question, but I'm more worried about things like the expansion of ISIS and the increased expansion of Al-Qaeda, people coming into our country illegally, people coming here that want to kill us. I do believe that we have to focus on national security, because if we don't have national security, we cannot have economic security.
Mr. Blaha, if the Employment Non-Discrimination Act were to be introduced again, would you support it, and why or why not?
Well, I'm not going to object to your question, but what I am going to do is point out the foolishness of what we're talking about here, folks. The number is 0.003% of the people that identify themselves as transgender. 0.003%. Let me put that in perspective for you. If you go to your local Target store, there's approximately 1,800 Target stores in America. If you go to your local Target store, the probability of you running into somebody who wants to use the restroom who is transgender, there may statistically be 5 people in any given day, with tens of thousands of people in and out of that store that might identify that way. We have lost our way in the night, folks. We are chasing windmills, and we need to get back and talk about important issues for our government, important issues to move our country forward, and we need to get off of some of these unbelievably politically correct kind of far left nutcase things that our president's taken us down. That's how simple it is.
Mr. Frazier, where do you stand on this?
I don't support discrimination of any sort. I mean, let me start there. But the big issue with what President Obama did, which really bothers, I think, many people, is that time and again this president has shown that he tends to rule by edict. That somehow His Majesty, President Obama, can rule on high from his ivory tower and tell you and I and our homes and our local communities how best to live our lives. I don't think that's the American way. What is the American way is, as a father of 3, as a co-founder of one of the largest public charter schools in our state, and as someone who has represented the 3rd largest urban community in Colorado, I believe states and local communities are best suited to make these types of decisions, because we, as a people, know what's best for us where we live.
And Mr. Glenn, if the Employment Non-Discrimination Act were to be introduced again, would you support it? Why or why not?
Well, the one thing I'm going to do is actually read it and find out what's in it. But on its face, based on how you're presenting the question, the answer is no. And I took a leadership position out of these candidates here and actually sent out a policy paper completely objecting to our president, again, acting by fiat and pushing this policy down. These are 10th Amendment, these are local school level issues. We start talking about this. I'm sorry, I missed the memo when I was invited to a meeting to actually give my opinion about these particular issues. We haven't even had a public discussion about the public safety impacts of the transgender bathroom issue. But we have a president that's basically using the Department of Education to push policies down. That's why I'm pushing to dissolve it. I'm pushing to make sure that we roll back Common Core. I'm pushing to make sure that we empower local school districts and families to be able to make those decisions. That's the difference that they're going to get with me when I'm in Washington.
So, gentlemen, if I may, it's a tricky question, because the President Obama's decision or announcement recently obviously is in all of our minds. But the question's focused on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. The issue is that recently, when it was introduced, when Mr. Kaufman supported it, it expanded rights for the LGBTQ community at the workplace. I wonder if we could just do a quick, lightning round, if you will, of yes, do you support it, no, do you support it? And we'll just go down the line so we don't get out of order.
I haven't read it.
Chuck, I mean, you know, unlike Nancy Pelosi, who says they have to pass a law before we get to know what's in it, I'd like to actually read the law. And before I can give you a firm answer, for folks who are
So you haven't
watching-
read it either?
I haven't read it.
So
So
maybe you'd like to highlight it for
Right.
us and give us the top 5
Or-
points.
or maybe-
And then we can.
Well, I
respond.
just
Sometimes
explained
in
it
advance.
pretty
Have you read
succinctly.
it? Chuck, have you read
Yeah,
it?
I have read about it, not the whole
So
thing.
you haven't read it either?
But
There you go.
I am just a lowly
Has
politician.
anybody in here read it?
Yeah.
I rest my
Mr.
case.
Glenn.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and don't be so hard on yourself. You're not
We have a
just
copy of it
lawyer.
here if you'd like to look at it before you leave.
And if you would like to read this and have us read it. but-
Just yes or no.
No, there's no yes or no on that type of
All
question.
right.
I don't subscribe to that. It's one of these things, I've already answered the question. I read things and make an informed decision, unlike the people in office now.
Got a basic principle here about protecting workers in a
You
workplace.
can't answer, you
Well,
can't answer
you know,
questions.
Mr. Graham.
You know, I haven't read it either, but I do understand it in principle because I did run businesses for, you know, over 20 years, including our own business here in the state of Colorado. And I can tell you from my perspective, creating a work environment that is safe to anyone, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of religious creed, regardless of sexual orientation, is the kind of work environment that I'm going to create, and it's the kind of environment that I'm going to insist upon. And so long as that bill supports those principles, I'm 100% in.
Mr. Keyser.
You know, like I said, it's already my understanding that LGBT rights are protected in Colorado, so I didn't even know to what extent it would even affect us. I think, frankly, Washington, D.C. could learn a lot of lessons from Colorado. We seem to have a lot of common sense here. I'd like to take some of that common sense and bring it to Washington, D.C.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question, which has to do with Donald Trump, your party's presumptive nominee. He angered many Latino groups in saying that Mexico was sending its rapists and criminals into our country. How do you appeal to Latinos in Colorado who may be offended by Mr. Trump? We're going to start with Mr. Keyser.
Well, I was down in Pueblo this past week, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he said to me, John, you know what, promise me one thing. Promise me that when you talk about issues in Colorado, that you're not talking about white issues or black issues or Latino issues, Hispanic issues. You're talking about all issues, because the Hispanic community, he was a member of the Hispanic community, he said all issues are issues that we care about in the Hispanic community. And I said, well, you know, I will definitely try to do that. I'm a second-generation Coloradan. And he said, that's great. I'm a fifth-generation Coloradan. So the Hispanic community in this state is deeply, deeply rooted. And I think we have to, again, focus on the number one priority of the federal government, which is national security and defense. We have to secure our borders. We have to make sure that we have an equipped Army and Navy and an Air Force. And we have to make sure we take care of our men and women in uniform, because right now we're not doing that. When people come home from their service, they shouldn't be waiting for months to receive treatment. We shouldn't have 55,000 homeless veterans in this country. These are huge problems, and these are ones that I will address head on when I'm in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Blaha, how do you appeal to Latinos who may feel offended by Mr. Trump?
You know, this is a very important question, because this is literally how we win the race. The Hispanic community, and we have Hispanics in our family, but the Hispanic community really has the same issues we all do. I think we reach them on 2 or 3 very specific areas. We reach them with faith, we reach them with family, and we reach them with education. The reason that's so important is because I think we have done a disservice to the Spanish community and the Hispanic community by taking them down some rat holes, because they have those are their concerns. When you sit down and you go to the communities and you listen, those are concerns. And I'll tell you, as a board member of Conservatives of Color in this state, those are the issues we hear. The problem Republicans have is we don't go out and we're not seen. We show up every 3 or 4 years and we say, we're here, vote for us. We need to be in there, we need to be in the barrios, we need to be in the barbershops, we need to meet people, we need to be accessible, and if we do that, they will understand that the conservative cause is where they want to be.
How about you, Mr. Frazier? How do you appeal to Latinos?
First off, I'm running for United States Senate. And while our presumptive nominee may be Mr. Trump, I will tell you it doesn't matter who the president is. When I agree with that person, I will stand with them, and when I don't, I will stand against them. As someone who's worked in our community for years, this isn't just day one for me. I didn't just start caring about Colorado. I care about Colorado, and I have a proven track record of doing so. How do you talk to the Hispanic community? Well, you talk to them about the same issues they care about, which many of us care about. They talk about middle skills jobs, jobs in general. how do you get more people working, get our economy growing so that they can provide for their families? You also talk about education reform, choice. You know, too many Black and Hispanic kids are stuck in schools, quite frankly, where they aren't getting a good education today. I should know. I grew up in a struggling school myself. And so we need to make sure we're empowering our families to have greater choice so that families can decide how best and where best to educate their kids. And last but not least, let's talk about faith. You know, far too often we've pulled faith out of the conversation in society when we need to be talking about it more, protecting our religious freedoms. These are issues that I think really connect with the Hispanic community, as well as all communities.
Mr. Glenn, how do you appeal to Latinos who may feel offended by Mr. Trump?
Well, I recognize how we got here. You know, over 7 years ago, the president ran on hope and change, and he was going to be the great uniter. And I can tell you, we are talking about more racial issues now than we ever were back then. And I'm always asked when I'm out on the campaign trail, you know, how are you going to appeal to minority voters? Well, first, I recognize the fact that this is not about brown America, black America, white America. This is about the United States of America. And I think it's time that we start focusing in on those core issues that are actually mean what it says in the Constitution. Get back to the job of the federal government. Get back to recognizing the fact that, especially in Colorado, we need to lead. You know, Mr. Trump is offering a message of basically that America is broken. And I understand he's our nominee, but I want to help him. I want to be able to show him the fact that Colorado, what is happening right here, we are going to lead this nation as we come back and achieve American exceptionalism for all of us, regardless of race, sex, and orientation.
Mr. Graham, where do you stand on this? How do you appeal to Latinos who are offended by Mr. Trump?
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that we have a problem, first and foremost. We do have a deep wound here as a result of what Donald Trump said some number of months ago. He did offend Mexicans and Latinos deeply. He offended me, frankly, with the comments that he made. So I've said repeatedly, I want different and I want better from Donald Trump. And frankly, I think we're starting to see different and better. He's given some speeches recently that indicate to me that he does have the capacity to change and help to mend some wounds. From my perspective, I want the Hispanic and Latino community in the state of Colorado to understand that we are here to represent all people of the state of Colorado, including the Hispanic and Latino community, because they're such a sizable and important part of our community. I want to take the stigma out of immigration. I don't want people to feel as if they're criminals. I want an effective work visa program that works for all people in the state of Colorado. And I also want to create a business environment that isn't so toxic that we are not seeing businesses form. We need more and better paying jobs. And those are the opportunities that we can present to the Hispanic and to the Latino community. It's going to take some work, frankly.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, next question. Do you believe the 11 million immigrants living in the United States illegally should be allowed to receive a form of permanent residency? If yes, what rights should that entail? If not, should they be sent back, and how would you accomplish that? And we start this one with Mr. Blaha.
Well, the answer is no, they shouldn't be given any special benefits. They should be allowed to get it in the back of the line just like everybody else did as they immigrate into our society. You know, this is a country of immigrants. And, you know, if you go back even 3 or 4 generations on my family, they came, they immigrated. And people, there's a process to be followed. And the way I look at it is, you know, a lot of people have a problem with securing the borders and talking about it. I think we must secure the borders because we all have houses. And in those houses, we have a door. We have a door for a very simple reason. We want to know who's coming here. And so we have to restrict what's happening. For the people that are here, we need to get their payroll pays. We need to find out if they're paying taxes. We need to make sure that we're not having money unnecessarily wired out of the country. But we need to respect the fact that they're here. And at the same time, if they are found to be guilty of any processes or any violations, they have to go home. It's really that simple. We do not have a choice, otherwise we're not following the rule of law, and this really is a fundamental issue of the rule of law.
Mr. Frazier, how about you? Do you support permanent residency? Should there be a path to that? And if yes, what rights would that entail? And if not, should they be sent back? And how would you accomplish that?
You know, for eight long years, President Obama and Michael Bennett have said that they were going to fix immigration, yet they've done nothing. After 8 years, immigration reform has not happened in this country. It's long past due. And if I'm elected to go to the United States Senate, I intend to work on this issue because I know it's important. But that conversation, Molly, quite frankly, starts first and foremost with border security. That's a national security issue, but as importantly, we need to know who's coming in and outside the country. It's important that we address border security through manpower, electronic surveillance, and a number of other tools that allow us to secure our borders. Once we've had that conversation, then we can move to talking about how we address work visa. You see, Instead of talking about legalization of citizenship or residency, we need to talk about how we get folks working in the country legally. This is why we need to address our work visa system. It's not working. I was on a Quail Ridge dairy farm just a week or so ago. Robert was there with me. And we had this conversation with the business owner there, and they told us, they said, you know, we got to address this system so that we can have the work visas needed to ensure they can meet the labor needs for their employer, for their business. And so we have to address work visas, and I believe if we do so, if we secure our borders, address work visas, and hold employers accountable, then we actually can fix immigration in this country.
Mr. Frazier, and we're going to get to this really briefly later, but Michael Bennett did do something about immigration and residency status. He was in that 2013 landmark Senate passage of a comprehensive immigration bill.
Okay.
So
Did it
You
actually
know what,
pass?
Chuck, only in Washington DC can you be a part of a piece of legislation that winds up failing
Right.
and then call that your big success.
Right.
Well,
Well,
you've
and-
been in Washington DC.
Well, and only in a debate where you have a moderator come to the defense of our opponent.
well,
And look, and Chuck,
I bring it up
Chuck, if I
because-
can double down on that.
I
mean,
bring it up
if you
because
consider that, if
the-
you
he
consider
was-
that successful, then you know, I'd hate to see what you consider failure, because that's not a success as far as I'm concerned.
But it's also our job to make sure that our viewers, our audience, our listeners, our readers are being informed, and to let that slide without acknowledging it would also not be fair.
Well, the flaw with Michael Bennett's bill in 2013 as part of the Gang of Eight is that it was mandatory amnesty. If you were an illegal immigrant in the country, one of the 11 million or more people that were here illegally, you mandatorily had to become a permanent resident and on a path to becoming a citizen of the United States of America. And that is what was not acceptable to the Republican Party and to a huge number of Americans as well. We all value the vote far too much. And by the way, there's probably somewhere between 50 and 80% of the illegal immigrants that are in our country here today that actually don't want to be here permanently. They want to be on a work visa, a migrant visa program. They want to go home. And we've blocked them from effectively doing that. So what Michael Bennett put forward and the Gang of Eight put forward was mandatory citizenship, and that wasn't acceptable to any of us.
so we got out of order there.
I can jump back
Go,
in. I
yeah,
remember
jump, and
the
then we'll,
question.
if it's all right, we'll jump to Mr. Keyser after that. Was that?
Well, I have a
would-
lot more to say. I'm fine with that.
All right, so
Well-
let's go with Mr. Glenn.
Yes, you know, and I guess my issue is you're at step C. And again, I want to be very clear. I am never going to support amnesty or sanctuary cities. I will defund those. I will fight against amnesty. You have to start with border and port security. You have to do that first. You have to recognize the fact that Republicans and Democrats have talked about this, but has failed to actually do something about it. We need to actually look at those policies that are encouraging people to violate the rule of law and shut those down. We also need to make sure that when we start talking about the immigration system, let's enforce all the laws that are on the books now, and then take a hard look and see what the status is. Because I think that's part of the problem. When you start thinking about the court system and how long it takes to get through there, as an attorney, there are efficiencies that we can gain, whether that's more resources, whether that's modernizing the technology that's there. We need to explore those particular options. But again, it needs to get back to the fact that it is a privilege to be an American citizen, and our policy should reflect that.
Mr. Graham,
Oh,
would
I'm
you like
not
me to
gonna
ask the
pass.
question?
Yeah, I think the
You get
original-
2 bites of the apple here.
Well, I'd like to directly ask you the question, to be fair to you. Do you believe that immigrants should have a path to residency? If yes, what would that entail? And if not, how would we send them back?
I need to restate the fact that of the 11 million illegal immigrants that are here today, somewhere between 50 and 80% of them don't want to be here permanently. So we need to make certain that they are moved to a path that enables them to consider a migrant worker work visa program. And I think the same approach needs to be taken with the people that want to stay here permanently. But if they want to be on a path to permanent residency, on a path to citizenship in the United States, number one, they must pass background checks. We need to know that the risk of terrorism, the risk of crime is minimal at most. They need to establish that they've got health care insurance. Either they've got it themselves or their employer is providing it to them. And they need to go to the back of the line. This is not an amnesty program. They need to go through the same process that anyone else who would come to the United States new today would have to go through. And that's an arduous process. That's a 5+ year process. The right to vote in the United States of America is near and dear to all of us, and we need to hold that sacred, and we need to protect it.
And Mr. Keyser, would you allow them to gain, the folks living here illegally to gain permanent residency? If not, how would you send them back? How would you accomplish
Well,
that?
Chuck, I think we're seeing some very clear differences here between those of us who are up here on the stage tonight. Of course, I've been the leader on this, and I know really better than anybody up here that immigration is a national security issue. I'm a career intelligence officer, and I'm currently assigned to United States Southern Command. So we deal with intelligence issues that are coming up through Central and South America. So I uniquely understand the threats that we face, and they are real. And we have to be focused on, number one, securing our border. Number two, we have got to make sure that we have a legal entry and exit system that's modernized and that we can actually use, because half the people that have come here illegally came here through illegal means. And finally, we have to make sure that we have a system in place that prohibits employers from employing illegal labor. When we do all of those things, we will have solved most of our problems. Now, the national security issue is always going to remain. We have to be watchful for that. But I do want to just mention here that I actually do think that what Jack described as amnesty, he's also said on April 21st that he thought that, in fact, that illegal immigrants should receive health care. I think that's wrong.
I'd like to respond since my name was brought up. Is that okay?
Part of the
You know,
rules.
I would just say,
Very
you know,
briefly.
You know, there you go again, John. And you think you've become
Good try.
You've become the kind of the model student of the Harry Reid School of Politics. And
April 21st.
If you want to go ahead and say something, even if you know it's not true, you just go ahead and say it anyway. I have said repeatedly that I will not support a program of amnesty. I just said it 3 minutes ago. So, John, if you want me to repeat it again for you,
What would you
I'm
call a
happy to do it.
pathway to citizenship in providing illegal immigrants with health care?
I did not say, you know, John, I did not say that they should have a pathway to health care. I said that they need to establish that they've got health care themselves or that their employer is providing it for them. And if they can't establish those things, they don't get to stay in the country legally. They've got to be deported. Those are the standards that I've got.
All right,
That's-
thank you for clarifying. Let's go ahead and move on now. Our next question is on the economy, and Colorado has certainly had a great economy. It's certainly been a bright spot for our state with solid job growth, an unemployment rate that is below the national average, well below, but wage increases have not kept up with the increased cost of living and housing, especially in Denver. Is there one specific policy proposal you would introduce to benefit the middle class and low wage earners? And Mr. Frazier, we're going to start with you.
Yes, Molly, and certainly I think, you know, the economy has worked for some people, but you take a drive down Colfax, have a conversation, or for that matter, go down Main Street in Montrose, and you'll hear very, very quickly, people are just surviving. They're just getting by. And while President Obama and Michael Bennett will tell folks that the unemployment rate is at 5% today, when you factor in those people who are working 30 hours a week or less, that number is actually closer to 10%. And that doesn't even include literally the millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands of Coloradans who've given up looking for work altogether. We can do so much better in America, but we need a pro-business growth administration and folks in the Senate who understand how business operates and creates jobs. I'm a small business owner. I understand that tax reform and regulatory reform is needed, but I want to just take a second and talk about middle skills jobs. I want to offer up policies that allow businesses to come together with the community to identify the training and education so that we can close the middle skills jobs gap. I'm talking about aircraft mechanics, electricians, welders. 50% of Colorado jobs today are middle skills jobs, yet only 42% of Coloradans are trained and educated to get those jobs. We have to close the gap.
Mr. Glenn, is there one specific policy proposal you would introduce to benefit the middle class and low wage earners?
It's not just one. I mean, when you look at the other side, they talk about fairness. What's fair about declaring war on coal? That's killing us in Colorado. What's fair about these unregulated bureaucrats that are just killing us when it comes to jobs? What's fair about Obamacare? These are policies that are actually, when you talk to people that sign on their paycheck and employ people that are actually stifling jobs. So it's not just one. It's an overall philosophy of fairness that's being presented out there by the Democrats. And they want to actually raise taxes and have this now new value-added tax. Well, how do you quantify that? I think we need massive tax reform. We need to restore more of your tax dollars to you. These are issues that when you start thinking about what the Republicans have to offer, these are issues that as your senator, I'm going to actually fight. Forget fairness. Let's get back to putting Coloradans back to work.
Mr. Graham, how about you? Is there one specific policy you could identify you would support to introduce benefits to the middle class and low wage earners?
If you'll indulge me, I'd actually say there's two. The first one is, if we're going to create more and better paying jobs, we're going to have a business environment that actually fosters the formation of new companies and the expansion and success of existing businesses. And we've got a business environment today that is flat out toxic. We have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. We have a regulatory environment that is choking, if not killing, businesses. So one specific move I would make is I would reduce the corporate tax rate to enable more companies to be formed so that we can produce more and better paying jobs. The other thing that's inhibiting the middle class from recapturing its place in our country and from our getting more and better paying jobs is healthcare. Many people will not hire people on a full-time basis because of the cost of healthcare. Again, having run businesses, it's a really hard swallow when you understand the cost of healthcare under Obamacare, and so that's an inhibitor as well. So we have to address the healthcare challenges, crisis, frankly, that exists in our country as well.
And Mr. Keyser, is there a specific policy proposal you would introduce to benefit the middle class and low wage earners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about this often. The largest tax increase in modern history has been Obamacare. And that has crushed the middle class, and it's crushed the people in Colorado. And you have a guy like Michael Bennet who goes over to the Western Slope where I grew up, and he says, I understand that I supported Obamacare and that he actually wanted a government option at the time. And I understand that it's devastated, especially healthcare in Western Colorado, and that's really affected middle-income earners. He understands those problems, or he says he does, but frankly, then he turns around and says, I don't have any solutions. That's what he said. Now, the first thing we need to do is repeal Obamacare, and we replace it with state solutions. The free market will help us with that. There's a whole bunch of different solutions that we can get into. But something else I think we have to talk about is tax reform. Because although Obamacare was a massive tax increase, and that's what the Supreme Court said, we have to make sure that we're not looking at just the corporate tax rate, because frankly, corporations can afford mountains and mountains of accountants and lawyers and all sorts of things that help them avoid taxes. We have to look at personal income tax as well.
Mr. Blaha?
Molly, I've got a quick question for you. Are we going to talk about healthcare a little bit later? You have questions about healthcare? Okay, well then obviously healthcare is one, taxes is second. But here's the issue. We need to find a way to sell to America better ideas. That's what the Republican Party needs to do, and here's how we do it. We get the smartest thinkers from Coke and the people from Pepsi, and we put them in a room. We say the issue is reducing the overburden of tax and getting it down to a level. We need a marketing plan on how to sell that to America, and we want to do it in 2 years. We want to go to America and explain why it makes sense to have a flat tax of 15 to 20%. We want to have that dialogue. We want to do small groups. We want to get people together. We want to collect the data as opposed to doing it in the closed chambers of Washington. We need to get out and talk to the American people, find out what they want. We know they want tax reduction, so let's give it to them, but let's give it to them in a smart way by outthinking the other side for once as opposed to just throwing it on the table.
Gentlemen, next question. We would like to hear more about why you don't support a federal minimum wage. And given that Colorado has enacted one, do you think the current rate of $8.31 an hour is sufficient? And we start with Mr. Glenn.
The minimum wage should be an entry-level salary. It should be market-driven. And I want to tell you about a conversation that I had with a young man in Denver that was an employer that loved the Seattle model, wanted $15 an hour, felt that that was going to be in the best interest of his company and his employee. And I asked him how well he was doing, and he said he was struggling, is bottom line. He was struggling to make sure to be able to provide for his employee. And then I asked him to really think back, do you think it's in the best interest of your business to then raise your employee's salary to $15 an hour? You could hear crickets. And I was waiting for that light bulb moment to flicker on. And then all of a sudden he realized the fact that if he did that, both he and his employee would be out of business. That's the reality of this situation. We need to bring market forces back in here. We need to bring common sense, and that's what I'm going to bring to Washington.
Mr. Graham, your thoughts on the minimum wage, and do you think the current rate of $8.31 an hour is sufficient?
The concept of a minimum wage that's defined at the federal, at the national level is oxymoronic from my perspective. The notion that the cost of living in the state of New York and the city of New York is comparable to that of the cost of living in Fort Collins, Colorado, obviously we understand. for us to have a defined federal minimum wage. It can be excessive in places, and it can be significantly deficient in others. This is something that needs to be taken up by the individual states. The state of Colorado can solve this problem and meet the needs of the people in the state of Colorado. That's where that decision belongs.
Mr. Keyser, your thoughts on a federal minimum wage, and do you think the Colorado rate of $8.31 an hour is sufficient?
Well, I first of all don't think that we need a minimum wage at the federal level. Of course, we have a different minimum wage at the federal level. It's lower, in fact, than we have in Colorado. But I think that's a big difference between liberals and conservatives. And I think that liberals are very focused on the minimum. What's the minimum? But I think as conservatives, I'm focused on maximizing opportunity. We do that through the free market. And I think that when hardworking Coloradans are out there and they're working hard, like my parents did. My dad was a construction worker, and my mom started in a produce department in a grocery store, and they worked hard. And they continued to work their way up, and they were able to put together a great living for me and my sister. It was a blue-collar living, but we were happy growing up. Later, I joined the military and graduated from the Air Force Academy. I think those are valuable things that you have to have in a United States senator, somebody that understands the value of hard work, somebody that's lived through those tough times, and somebody who's thinking about maximizing people's futures.
Mr. Blaha?
Thank you. When in doubt, go back to common sense. The free market is the answer. The free market should dictate what the marketplace will bear. Jack mentioned, everybody up here has mentioned different things. If you allow the free market to determine what the rate is, people will get the employees they could afford to hire. But let's go back. Let's go back about 25 years, and let's talk about what the purpose of the minimum wage was and what the minimum wage was. It was an entry-level position to allow individuals to get experience, to be able to get into the food chain of the free market and move up. And what we've done to that is we have disrupted that free market enterprise to the place where now, is it $12? Is it $15? Is it $7? Is it $6? It's different every place. And when you allow the government to do that, what happens is this. You see kiosks put in places rather than real people. We all read about that this week. That's a big move in a lot of the fast food. So we're going to see kiosks so where people could get experience. Now we're going to see kiosks. The answer is the free market.
Thanks, sir. And Mr. Frazier, your thoughts on the minimum wage. Do you think the Colorado rate of $8.31 is sufficient?
Yeah, the real question is, how much is everyday Coloradans willing to pay for a hamburger, or for that matter, a loaf of bread? I believe these decisions need to be made at the state level and be driven by market forces. The reality is, and I've talked to a number of small business owners who've expressed to me concern about increasing the minimum wage, because what it effectively does is, these guys are already operating on very thin margins. And so they have to do one of two things. Either in increasing that minimum wage, they're going to have to lay off people, reducing jobs in our community, which we know we need more of, or they're going to have to increase the cost of the service or goods that they're providing. And I think most Coloradans, most Americans, quite frankly, don't want to pay more for the services and goods they're receiving today. And so let's let the market drive these decisions. Let's let these decisions be made at the state level. And quite frankly, let's keep federal government, Washington, D.C., out of our decisions here in our local communities.
All right, we're going to move on to our, I guess I'll call it rapid fire, yes or no questions.
Now, this is the lightning round.
Lightning round.
We can call it that. Basically, this is a set of questions that we truly believe can be answered with a quick yes or no. We're going to go down the line quickly. Each of you will answer those questions. At the end of this segment, if there's a topic or something that you would like to elaborate on, you will have 30 seconds to do so. We ask you wait until the end of the segment. Sound good?
A yes or no, and then we can answer.
Exactly. All right. So, first question is, would you actively campaign with and for Donald Trump? Mr. Blaha.
Yes.
Frazier?
Depends.
This is yes or no, but I guess it could be yes, no, or depends. All right.
That's a product.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Probably.
No.
No. All right.
Should the federal government remove legal barriers?
Wait a second, I'd like to
expand on that.
respond.
Would-
No, at the end of 5 questions, you'll have a chance
I
to.
don't have that kind of retention.
You have
You
a
can take
notepad
notes.
with a light-up pen?
That's troubling.
I'll take notes.
You
for
can take
Jack.
notes if there's a topic you want to elaborate on.
The spirit of this,
I'll take notes for it.
spirit of this, we believe these should be yes or no questions, but we are allowing a short answer if there was one of them you really wanted to
Only one?
Elaborate on at
elaborate
the
on.
end.
Should the federal government remove legal barriers so that cannabis businesses can keep their money in banks? Mr. Blaha. We're doing it this way.
This
Yeah,
one,
Mr.
we're going to
Blaha.
go this way.
Okay,
Wrap it down the line.
ask the question again.
You bet. Should the federal government,
So we're not gonna rotate, we're just gonna.
not for
go-
this round.
Okay, all right.
Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Should the federal government remove legal barriers so that cannabis businesses can keep their money in banks? Mr. Blaha.
Depends.
Mr. Frazier.
Yes.
Mr. Glenn.
Depends.
Mr. Graham.
Optimally, yes.
Kaiser.
Yes.
Okay, would you have voted for the comprehensive immigration bill passed in the Senate in 2013? I think
No.
we talked a little bit about that already, but Mr. Blaha, no. Frazier?
No.
Mr. Glenn?
No.
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 Go ahead and let us call your name. It helps with folks making sure we get it right on TV land and stuff like
My name's Jack, and my answer was no.
that.
And I get to go first every time.
Yes, every single time on this round. Yes.
You like it that way, though, Robert?
It depends if you keep it up.
It's always nice to be first.
Would you vote to support a federal personhood bill? Mr. Blaha?
Depends.
Mr. Frazier?
No.
Mr. Glenn?
Depends.
Mr. Graham?
No.
Mr. Kaiser?
No.
Should women be included in the draft? Mr. Blaha?
No.
Mr. Frazier?
Not a one-word response, I'm sorry.
You'll have time at the end if you'd like to elaborate.
Between
We
this
don't
and
need a
Trump.
draft.
So,
Should women be included in the draft? Mr. Glenn?
Depends.
Mr. Graham?
There is a draft, yes.
And Mr. Kaiser?
No.
All
So,
right.
go ahead.
So now, we would like to give each of you 30 seconds to elaborate, solidify, whatever it is you want to call it.
Molly, is that
On-
30 seconds per subject that we'd like to comment
No,
on? Or we got-
30 seconds for each of you on any one thing you might want to,
I'll just
Elaborate
clarify-
on.
I'll take my 30, since I got to start first.
okay, Mr. Blaha, 30 seconds on the clock.
First of all, the premise of the questions is very difficult. I'm sure everybody realizes that, because these are not simple issues that you gave us to answer yes or no. Every one of those questions require a thoughtful, pragmatic, and detailed answer, and I think it's unfair that you put us in that lightning round. But Mr. Trump will be the Republican nominee. I am a Republican. I will do whatever I can to keep Hillary Clinton from being president of the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Frazier?
well, thank you. Further elaborate, I've always said that I intend to support the Republican nominee. But I've also said that I believe if that nominee is Mr. Trump, or for that matter, anyone, I think they'd be better than Hillary Clinton. But that person needs to come have a conversation in Colorado about what Coloradans care about. And I believe that's a conversation that needs to happen sooner than later. In fact, hopefully before the convention.
30 seconds for you, Mr. Glenn.
When you're talking about marijuana, it's not as simple as a yes or no. We need to have a discussion and a debate on whether or not we're going to respect the 10th Amendment and whether or not we're going to continue to clash with the Supremacy Clause. So we need to have that discussion, and once that discussion occurs and an answer is driven, that's when you can make that decision. Any bill, whether it's personhood or whatever, I want to read it, and when it comes to the draft, we're an all-volunteer force, and I pray that we never end up in a situation where we have a draft.
Mr. Graham?
Now, I've said a number of times that I want different and I want better from Donald Trump, and I still feel that way. We have seen recently he has participated, or he's given a foreign policy speech. He's made comments on a number of subjects, and he has shown us that he is capable of different, he is capable of better, and I would encourage him to continue to go down that path. I would say that there's almost a certainty that if I am the next candidate to oppose Michael Bennet, that Donald Trump and I would be standing on a podium with each other, and I frankly think we'd be a pretty good team.
Mr. Kaiser?
So I've said all along that I will support the Republican nominee, and I still intend to support the Republican nominee, but it's important also that we remember that I'm running for United States Senate to beat Michael Bennet. And with the discipline of a military officer, I will make sure that I stay very focused on that objective, because we can't screw this up. We have got to win this Senate seat, because the majority in the United States Senate hinges on Colorado. And finally, I said I didn't think women should be included in the draft, because I don't think we should have a draft. I think as long as we take care of our veterans when they come home, that we can continue to have our all-volunteer force.
Thank you, sir. Next round of questions, gentlemen. These are specific candidates for each of you. For this round, a candidate has 60 seconds to respond. We may ask a follow-up question. We start with Mr. Blaha. Mr. Blaha, when you joined the race, you said you would, if elected, leave office after a single term if you failed to cut illegal immigration in half, drastically cut deficit spending, and failed to help fix the tax system, which you called horrific. Given the gridlock in Washington, bipartisan collaboration is important to that. With whom would you align to accomplish those goals?
Well, let me answer the real question you ask. It's called the Robert Blaha guarantee. Part of the problem we have with people who go to Washington is they go to Washington to make a career out of being in Washington and feed it the public trough. It's about time we had individuals that will draw a line in the sand and say, here's exactly what I'm going to do. I made specific comments about taxes, about borders, and about debt and deficit. And everyone in this room has a to-be-done list. TBD. It might be on your refrigerator, it may be someplace else, but you have things you're going to do. I think it's time we put senators in Washington that will stand up, they'll say exactly what they're going to do, and much like everybody else that has a job, say, I want to be held accountable. I'm asking to be held accountable. Until we get to that place, we cannot break the gridlock that we see in Washington because we have to have a different cut of individual with a different cut of abilities. Until we do that, it cannot change. I'll stand by the Robert Blaha product guarantee.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Frazier, your campaign has struggled to qualify for the June 28th ballot. What would you have done differently, and why should voters trust that you have the wherewithal to manage a U.S. Senate office?
Well, thanks for the question. You know, first and foremost, I've said from the outset, I care about the heart and soul of our country. That's why I'm running, because I want to do my part to try to help make this country a little bit better, not just for me, but for our children and our grandchildren. When I think about what's happened with these petitions, quite frankly, Chuck, the system is broken. The rules are stuck in the last century, and I'm fighting to make sure that every valid voter's signature is counted. This isn't just about my campaign. This is about making sure that people all across Colorado who signed our petitions to be on the ballot, that their voice is heard. And I believe that's something that we're fighting for at large with this race. I'm fighting to fix a broken system. You know, this isn't a question of whether our campaign can manage a petition or not. These are valid signatures that we've reviewed, and we found time and again represent valid Republican voters whose signatures were thrown out for clerical or technical errors and quite frankly should be counted. And we're going to continue to fight. We've taken the fight to the Supreme Court. I think the very reason that the Supreme Court has taken up our case should send a signal to all of Colorado that they too see the errors in the system. We're going to fix it.
Mr. Glenn, you have labeled yourself a Christian conservative and have hedged on whether you would support Donald Trump's ban on Muslim travel to the United States. Should atheists and followers of other religions be concerned that you would take steps to weaken the country's separation of church and state?
Well, actually, I'm a Christian constitutional conservative. And what I take issue with is forecasting our rules of engagement. When you tell the enemy that you're only going to look at Muslims on whether they come to the state, you're telling your enemy that this is what your parameters are. The proper way to do that is to identify a system to really screen people that are actually going to come to this country and do us harm. That's really the issue. It's not about one religion, because there are plenty of Muslims that love this country, do not want to do us harm. But to just single out because there's some radical Islamic terrorists and ban an entire religion, that's wrong. What we need to do is identify and put a system in place to identify people that are going to be threats to this country. We don't need to tell everybody that so that our enemy doesn't adapt and work around that. We need to be more strategic, ladies and gentlemen. We're at war, let's start acting like it.
Mr. Graham, you were fired as the athletic director at CSU in 2014. What went wrong, and what would you say to people who question whether you're capable of taking on an even bigger job in the U.S. Senate?
You know, I loved that job. I thoroughly enjoyed the student athletes, the coaches, the fans, and we got a lot done in a very short period of time. We got approval to build an on-campus stadium. We raised money for it. We designed it, and it's under construction today. The most gratifying part of that job was the culture changes that took place. We had behavior issues. We demanded that our student athletes be people of character and represent the university perfectly, and they did. We demanded that they get good grades, have good academic experiences, and they did. And we demanded that they win, and they won. We ended up being ranked first in the nation in wins in football, men's and women's basketball, and volleyball. So we got a lot done in a very short period of time. And I can tell you, when you walk into any kind of a public institution that has an embedded bureaucracy, and by the way, I love Colorado State University. It is a great university, but like any public institution, it's got its own bureaucratic nightmares. And I did take those things on. We got the changes done. We moved the university forward. And, you know, as I said, I love that job, and I'm very proud of the accomplishments that we delivered.
All right, Mr. Keyser, there was a lot of establishment excitement around your candidacy initially, but as national politics have shown, this year voters appear to have very little appetite for establishment candidates. Has this affected your approach to winning support in this Colorado primary?
Well, I think your question would be probably a surprise to my mom and dad, who were married when they were 18 and 19 years old. And as I mentioned, my dad was a construction worker, and my mom worked in a produce department at a grocery store. I grew up in a blue-collar family in the western slope of Colorado, so I understand this state. I worked hard and graduated from the Air Force Academy. And when I graduated, we had two ground wars going on. One was in Iraq, and one was in Afghanistan. And so I decided that the best way that I could serve our country was serving on the ground. So I became an intelligence officer, and I was a part of a special operations team, and we did capture-kill missions on members of al-Qaeda and the Iranian-backed insurgency. And that's very important because right now we have an enemy that has declared war on the United States of America. And we have to have a senator that understands the threats that we face at home and abroad and is ready to do what is necessary to keep us safe and secure and economically prosperous. And that is exactly what I will do.
Mr. Frazier, the media has taken a lot of heat for its coverage of the 2016 campaign. Do you think the growing use of political pundits on television, such as your own stint in that arena, has helped or hurt the election process?
I don't know what you're talking about, Chuck. So, you know, my small stint on...
I didn't either.
It was significant.
If you're referring to my small role as a 9 News political expert,
I thought it was massive.
was it? Yeah. Well, I always remind folks that that didn't define Ryan Frazier. You know, you're sitting here talking to a guy who's a small business owner. That's how I make my bread. That's how I put food on the table and a roof over the head and clothes on my kids' backs, quite frankly. The reality is we believe in this country that freedom of speech is an important part of who we are as Americans. And so I'm never one to say that no matter who you are, that you can't express your opinion. And so the fact that we have these pundits, quite frankly, Chuck, I don't care because it doesn't affect me. And I tell you, as I travel all across Colorado, it doesn't affect most Coloradans. They want a United States senator who will go to Washington and that will fight for Colorado, who will push for the types of policies that help move America in a better direction. And that's why I'm running for United States Senate. I think that's what's most important in this election.
Mr. Glenn, you have called for streamlining of the U.S. military. If this included the closure of Northcom in Colorado, as Senator John McCain and others have suggested, would you support that move?
Well, for one thing, that's not even possible right now to even make that level of decision. What I do support is the fact that we have a $19 trillion plus deficit. We have a growing military threat that's out there, and we have automatic defense cuts that are built into the budget. Our men and women are being stretched beyond belief. And what we need to do is we need to take a look at a process to create efficiencies within the government, especially the military. We need to look at whether or not we need to realign certain bases. And that's a comprehensive look. It's not so quick to where we're just going to identify close this one particular installation or not. But we need bold and brave leadership. And I am the only one up here with the credibility to be able to talk about this issue because I'm the only one that's actually been a part of that process. So I take that near and dear to my heart, and I take that seriously. We do need to look at modernizing the force.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Graham, less than 2 years ago, you were a registered Democrat. You support same-sex marriage, abortion rights, and Senate hearings for Merrick Garland. What values do you hold that align you now with Republicans?
You know, first, by way of background, I was raised in a Democratic family. My dad is 98 years old, still living today, an FDR Democrat that came out of the Depression era. I thought Jack Kennedy walked on water as a kid, so it really wasn't a conscious choice. Got into my business career and raising my family, supported George Bush, I supported Pete Wilson, never supported a Democrat. And I would also point out that of the last 3, if I'm the next U.S. Senator from the state of Colorado, I will be the 4th successive Republican who was a Democrat and then switched over to the Republican Party. Wayne Allard, Ben Nighthorse Candle, Cory Gardner, and I think we need to leave Ronald Reagan in that conversation as well. From a policy perspective, if you look at what matters to the Republican Party, whether it's financial security, balancing the budget, creating a business environment that does foster the creation of more and better paying jobs, national security, repealing Obamacare, a rational immigration program, a rational energy program, I think I am a model Republican.
Mr. Frazier, what place, if any, do enhanced interrogation techniques, I'm sorry, Mr. Keyser, I apologize for that. What place, if any, do enhanced interrogation techniques, torture as some would call them, have in the pursuit of terrorists?
Well, I believe that, I don't believe in torture, and I believe that we have a field manual that very clearly outlines what our military is allowed to do and is not allowed to do. But I have to take issue with something Jack said, calling himself a model Republican and likening himself to people like Cory Gardner. Frankly, when those people changed to the Republican Party, Jack, they also changed their policy positions. They didn't support abortion. They didn't continue to support amnesty. They didn't want to give the opportunity for Barack Obama to put a liberal Supreme Court justice to change the way that our country works for a generation and probably put our Second Amendment rights in place. That is not the definition of a conservative, and it's certainly not the definition of a model conservative.
I'll respond.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
I guess there you go again, John. Even if it's not true, just go ahead and say it. I've already addressed the amnesty issue, and I do not think that the Republican Party has defined itself strictly on the basis of whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, whether or not you oppose gay marriage or not. Those are not the gating issues in the United States of America today. The gating issues in the United States of America are national security, economic security, energy policy, a rational health care program. Those are the issues that matter to the people of the United States of America. And I will stand by my statement that I am a model conservative Republican that can represent this state very effectively.
Well, I was mentioned there, and if I can just
I think
interject
what
for a
Ryan,
second.
I think what Ryan and I are gonna do. down
Excuse me,
here,
I was
I'm gonna say
interjecting. I was
Ryan,
just
and he'll say
interjecting.
If I might,
And then
so that we
get
can
some-
make our time
Chuck, just
schedule.
real quick, I think that it is important that we do understand the values that Republicans really do care about. We care about our Second Amendment rights in the Republican Party. And we know that if Barack Obama puts this justice on the Supreme Court, the Second Amendment rights are in jeopardy. We don't believe in abortion. We believe in protecting life. We don't believe in giving amnesty to illegal aliens. And that is absolutely false to say that Republicans don't care about those issues. We care about national security, we care about economic security, but we care about all of these different issues. And that's what makes us the Republican Party.
We care about integrity.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that round. We'll move on now to candidate questions.
We have Mr. Blaha.
Oh, you're right.
One
So
more
sorry.
question for you.
Thank you, thank you.
Say my name, man.
I get nervous around deadline.
I'll say, what I'm gonna do is during this answer, you'll see that I will somehow include Ryan, so Ryan can back to me, and we'll dominate for a second.
All right,
And I will include
Watch
you.
this, just watch
let's see
this.
how you do.
I got you.
Should the U.S. commit ground troops to fight the Islamic State, and if so, how many troops would you support sending?
Well, I'd be interested to talk to Ryan about that. But I would say that would be a last choice. You know, we have high technology capabilities. Let me tell you what we do need to do. I'm the only person standing up here that called for an Article 1, Section 8. What's an Article 1, Section 8? It's a declaration of war against ISIS. I wrote a couple op-eds about it. We talked about it extensively, and here's why. When America declares war and says we are going to stop what is bad, we stop fascism, we stop communism, we do things that the world cannot believe. When we do AUMFs, authorization for military force, all we do is put our men and women at risk, and they get killed around the world. And I'd be honest, what do you think, Ryan?
Well, I tell you what, Robert, I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but let me go here. For that matter, Darryl.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, we would like to make the decision on letting
Put the joke
follow-ups,
aside,
and that doesn't really, that's not a true engagement or attack. So we would like to move on.
I would like to take just a second, because I don't believe we need to have U.S. troops on the ground at this point. I do think we need to bolster the airstrikes, and we need to equip and provide military advisors to the Sunni and Kurdish soldiers who are on the ground, because at the end of the day, if we want to defeat ISIS, and I want to destroy ISIS, we must destroy their caliphate. And in doing so, we destroy their whole basis for existence. That's the only way that we ultimately defeat ISIS.
If I was mentioned there, do I get to respond?
No. All right. This is where we talked about earlier about the candidates being able to ask a direct question to another candidate. Just so everyone knows, before we got started tonight, the candidates did pick a number out of a hat, and they will ask a question of the candidate whose number they picked. Questions must be asked in 20 seconds or less, and the candidate must answer the question in 60 seconds or less. So 20 seconds to formulate your question, 60 to answer it, and the clock will start with that. Mr. Glenn, you picked Mr. Keyser, so you get to ask him a question.
Okay. John, we are both Air Force Academy grads, and we live under an honor code. And if there's an independent audit of every signature on your petitions, and there are enough illegal signatures so that you no longer qualify for the ballot based on the Secretary of State's guidelines, will you withdraw from this race?
Well, thanks. Glad I get an opportunity to talk about that question. You know, as I already mentioned here, this is a very simple case of explaining what actually did happen and the fact that I didn't know about it. And I think it's important that leaders take the time to air out exactly what happened, allow the information to come in, and then use the discipline that's necessary to be able to provide an honest answer. And I didn't know what was going on with the circulator and the signatures and all of that stuff. But I can tell you one thing. The Democrats were absolutely gleeful for the past couple weeks because we have had, all of us up here on the stage have endured weeks of stories about signatures and this and that, but they have not been focused on policy. And the Democrats are gleeful because they know that if we're not talking about Michael Bennet and his failed record, then the Democrats are winning. But we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to beat each other up here on this stage because we know that at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we beat Michael Bennet because the control of the United States Senate it hangs in the balance, and frankly, our constitutional rights hang in the balance. So, no, I will not drop out of this race. Michael Bennet wishes that I would, but I will not.
I'm sure the Academy is glad to hear that answer.
So, Mr. Graham, you have a question for Mr. Frazier.
Our powers are complete. We get to ask the questions now. Good to be with you, Ryan. I think all of us agree that we need to balance our budget and cut our federal debt. An equally important challenge facing America is to grow our economy because we know doing so will generate more and better paying jobs. What would you do as a U.S. Senator to grow our economy?
Thank you, Jack, for that question. I think, quite frankly, the most important thing we can do in the United States Senate is to work on those policies that get Washington out of the way, that allow small business owners and medium-sized business owners to actually create jobs and get more Americans working. So I do support tax code reform. I do support reforming regulations. And I support focusing on middle skills jobs. You know, we don't talk about that enough in our country. A middle skills job is those jobs that don't quite require a 4-year college degree, but you need more education and training than, say, a high school diploma. Aircraft mechanics, welders, electricians. 50% of Colorado jobs today are middle skills jobs. Yet only 42% of Coloradans are trained and educated to get those jobs. We need policies that bring together our business community with technical and trade schools, with our community at large, so that we can identify people who want to work for themselves. You see, I know what that's like. I was that kid that grew up in a single-family home that didn't have much, but my mom taught us that the value of a dollar, to faith in God, and to work hard. And she said, you get out there in America, you can make a life for yourself. And so we need policies that push forth opportunity in our country. That way everybody, no matter who you are, can make a life for yourself.
Thanks, Ryan.
Mr. Keyser with a question for Mr. Blaha.
Yeah, Robert,
Hey, John.
I just had a question for you about, frankly, the president's current policy in Syria seems to be pretty nebulous, but from what I can tell, it involves some sort of limited engagement with military advisors and some airstrikes and maybe arming the Kurds and some things like that. But what do you specifically think that we ought to do in Syria?
Well, Syria is a very serious place for a couple reasons, not the least of which is we have a lot of terrorism that as you know, that spurs out of there. And so I think the first and foremost thing we need to do is change our relationship with the Syrian government. We need to make it very crystal clear that when we draw red lines in the sand, we mean they're red lines. And what we've done is we've lost a tremendous amount of credibility on the world stage because we've done very little there, as you and I would agree. And I think until we get back to a place, John, where we actually do what we say we're going to do and we get the credibility back that we need on the international stage, it's going to be impossible to ever make progress. So there's a lot of things we can do. We need to support some of the faction groups. We can do that. We need to look at some additional military action. But for right now, the most important thing I think we need to do is we need to, on the world stage, stand up and take a position someplace in the world that says that we're going to lead, because we have lost our leadership role. And I think every year, every day that it moves beyond that, it gets worse and worse. Thank you.
And Mr. Blaha, you have a question for Mr. Graham.
I do.
Be nice.
I can't. This question was a follow-up to yours. You know, Jack, your last job was 2 years ago at CSU, and they asked the question. I was sent your performance review. I read your performance review. You know, I went through it, the 360 degree. You were classified as a lousy leader, and you were not trustworthy. That was from your peers and the people that work with you and around you, Jack. My question is this: if your peers at CSU couldn't trust you, and the management at CSU couldn't trust you, why should the electorate trust you?
Well, you know, Robert, first of all, I would challenge you to produce a true performance review of my performance at Colorado State University versus one that was fabricated.
Jack, I've got the review here. Would you like a copy
The
of it?
review you have is the one that was published in the newspaper.
It was published. It was published
Right.
in the newspaper.
So
It was.
produce.
That's why I'm
produce-
asking the question.
Well, I'm going to answer your question, Robert. So produce a true performance review that reflects my performance. at
Will you
Colorado-
sign a release and
Robert,
allow
would
it
you
to be
please let me-
released?
Would you please
Will you
let me-
sign a release and allow it to be released?
You know, Robert.
Please let him answer.
Okay, sure.
I did multiple performance reviews over the course of my stay at Colorado State University. Once I had completed the job of raising $60 million for the stadium, of hiring and firing 9 new coaches, of extending the 4 key coaches' contracts for 10 years to ensure we wouldn't have the stepping stone dynamic that was polluting that environment. Once I got all of that work done, the decision was made to move me out and move me on for a variety of political reasons. And the performance review that you are referring to is one that was fabricated and released illegally to the press. Performance reviews are private information that are never to be released to the press, and they were released illegally. I chose not to pick a fight because I love my university. That is history.
So
I have moved
you're
on.
saying those statistics and the numbers and the evaluation
Are
of three
fabricated and they are not real.
It's not correct.
They are not correct, and I
And
will allow you to pick any
And you're
human being.
willing to sign a release and allow your performance reviews
No, I am
to
not,
be,
I am not going to start to unearth a bunch of old information that is
it's
not
2
relevant
years
to the
ago,
future.
Jack. This is new news.
Robert, I am not going to release a bunch of performance reviews that are going to tear open a scab
you've
for
answered the
Colorado
question.
State University.
This
for
is
all the
why I'm
people
in
around me.
between them, ladies and gentlemen.
And you're doing a good job.
You know,
I challenge you,
this is why.
Robert, I will challenge you to go find an employee that I work with and have them stand alongside you or anyone you pick and ask them to give a testimony of what it was like to work with me, or at the company that I formed and ran for 15 years here in Colorado, which is still thriving today. I passed that baton, and that company is thriving today under new leadership. It's a
Jack,
classic.
there was
So,
articles,
I'm sorry.
there was articles written about this, Jack, when you left. I mean, there was one in the Colorado.
And I
There was many things passed
suspect there will
around.
be a few more. So
All I'm doing is a follow-up actually to your 2 questions.
we appreciate the heads up.
Glad to.
Let's move on.
Mr. Frazier with a question for Mr. Glenn.
Thank you. You know, this is usually part of the program where the media and Michael Bennett, quite frankly, expects us to all beat up on each other. And I'm not going to do that. So I think we're better than that. And this isn't about any one of us. This is about our country. So Darryl, you know, Michael Bennett votes with President Obama 98% of the time. He voted for Obamacare that sent premiums through the roof for everyday Coloradans. He voted to release funds from Guantanamo Bay that we know will be used to bring terrorists to U.S. soil. Time and again, he's shown his allegiance to President Obama and a lack of faith in Colorado. Do you believe that Colorado, or any of us for that matter, can trust Michael Bennett to serve us in Washington?
Well, and I want to thank Mr. Frazier for his professionalism and his question, because he's helped focus this issue back on the fact that this isn't the gotcha corner. You know, this isn't a reality TV show. This is the real lives of people that are hurting. And Michael Bennett is not in the best interest of this country or in Colorado. And I think it's high time that we focus as a group on our true opponent, and that's Mr. Bennett. And I tell you, I talk to people all the time, and they are so frustrated with the media in trying to set us up, pit one of us against each other. And that's not right. You know, I'm a man of faith, and I'm going to treat everybody with dignity, grace, and respect. But I will point out issues that are inaccurate. I will point out issues where you have fallen off from a leadership standpoint, because if you can't handle it here, you're going to get swallowed up when it comes to being up in Washington, D.C. And that's why it's so important that we cannot risk sending a rookie to do a job.
All right, candidates, that marks the end of our questions for you tonight. We appreciate the lively discussion at times. And now we would like to give each of you 60 seconds for closing remarks. This time we're going to start at this end with Mr. Keyser. You have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you, Denver Post, for hosting this debate. This is a special debate for me because my grandfather used to work at the Denver Post long ago as a union man, and I know he would be proud if he saw me standing up here on the stage tonight. My name is Jon Keyser, and I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 kids. I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy, a Colorado native. I served our country in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm a career military intelligence officer. And I know what it takes to keep this country safe, secure, and economically prosperous. And that is where we have to focus in this election, because so much is at stake. But if we don't secure our country first, if we don't protect our borders, then we don't have a country. And without national security, we can't have economic security. My name is Jon Keyser. I'd like your vote. Please go to jonkeyser.com, and I'm asking for your support. Thank you again.
Mr. Graham?
I know all of us are deeply concerned about the direction of our country. The incessant bickering and fighting has rendered us to a state of almost permanent paralysis. And this is in the context of our desperate need to get a lot of very important things done. We need a change in culture. We need a change in behavior. We need a change in leadership in Congress. Well, I'm not a career politician. I've never run for office. I've never held office. I had a 35-year successful career in business, including the formation of a company here in Colorado that's continuing to thrive today, employs over 250 people. It's ranked one of the best places in the state of Colorado to work. And now I'm running for the United States Senate. And I can tell you, I'm not obligated to anyone other than the people of the state of Colorado. I am committed to strengthening our security, committed to strengthening our freedom, and to creating a business environment that will foster the formation of more and better paying jobs so that we can perpetuate prosperity for all Americans. Thanks for having me. I'm Jack Graham. I'd appreciate your support in June.
Mr. Glenn?
You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute privilege to be out here and talk to you. And I can tell you, there's a reason why I am the first name on the ballot. There is a reason why I went through the assembly process, because I'm the only candidate so far that's actually won something. When you start thinking about the first hurdle, that was the assembly. That's consolidating the grassroots effort. I'm the only one that can stand up here and say that. I think it's extremely important that we need leadership. We need to restore that faith and trust. That's why integrity is so important. That's why I hold the Academy values so near and dear to my heart, and I will challenge anybody that brings those into question. I get it, ladies and gentlemen. We need to stand up for the defense of this country. We need to stand up for energy independence, and we need to restore fiscal responsibility. Now is the time. I'm Darryl Glenn. I want to be your next senator. Go to electdarrylglenn.com. Put me in, coach. I can win this race.
Frazier?
Thank you again to the Denver Post for hosting this. You know, I said in the debate, I care about the heart and soul of our country. I care about our people. And I think we can do so much better in America. That's why I got in this race. That's why I'm running for United States Senate. I think of people like Mike Baltusar. He was raised by his grandparents to the age of 14, and he always grew up just wanting to work with his hands, an opportunity to make a life for himself and his family. You see, that's the American dream. That's what this election is about. We're fighting for the type of America that says no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter your skin color, your station in life, if you're willing to work for it, there's an opportunity to make a life for yourself. That's what's at stake. Yes, we need to keep America safe. I'm a military veteran. Yes, we need to grow jobs. I'm a small business owner. But we have to remember that what we're fighting for is not just about us in this room or those watching on the internet. We're fighting for the type of country that we can pass on to future generations that says, you can make it. That's the America we're fighting for. My name's Ryan Frazier, and I'm asking for your vote and your support. Thank you.
And Mr. Blaha?
Thank you all for being here tonight. You know, this is a great opportunity to really have people look and make decisions. The question I would leave everybody tonight is this. Are we happy with what the permanent political class is doing for ourselves and our children and our kids and our grandkids? Because if we are, we need to re-elect people that look exactly like what we've been sending to Washington for the last 40 years. If in fact that's not the case, which I pick up around the state. And people are asking for a different cut of individual, people that have really done things in the public domain. I'd ask people to look and think deeply. Do we want people who will stand on their feet, take on issues, and change Washington? And maybe most importantly, after they go to Washington, do the most important thing they can do: go home. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for hanging just a few extra minutes so we could hear closing remarks from each of you. We've gone a few minutes over, but we think it was worth it.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Good job, man.
We, I planned on it.
Good work.